I'm Michael Favaza, and I'm here with Don Petie. He's a World War II veteran. I'm going to be asking him a few questions. First, why did you join the service? Were you drafted or did you volunteer?
Well, I declared 4F because I had high blood pressure, and I had a very good job working as a lithographic plate maker in downtown Providence. But I got to be 21, and all my friends were in the service, and I even had a younger brother who had just joined the Navy. So I went down to the Naval Recruiting Office and wanted to sign up, and I'll never forget, one doctor checked me over, then they passed me along to another doctor, and he checked me over, and I'll never forget, they each looked at each other and nodded their heads. Apparently at that time, all they needed, they had so many ships under construction and already constructed that they needed warm bodies to fill them. That's about what I figured. Anyway, I got in, and then I got into the Navy. So then I had expected to go to the boot camp in Newport, but I went out to Great Lakes, and ordinarily a boot camp takes 16 weeks. Well, I went to boot camp and they were in such a hurry, they only took 4 weeks. But all they did was give me my shots and hand me a Blue Jackets manual, and we did some exercises and got my uniforms. And then we took tests, and I had a high enough grade to make fire control school. I didn't even know what that was anyway. But anyway, so I had to leave. I went home for a week and came back, and I went to fire control school at Great Lakes for 16 weeks. And we took tests, and I made a high enough grade to qualify for Fleet Fire Control School. So I had another week's leave, and the Fleet Fire Control School was out in San Diego. So I went out to San Diego, and I'll never forget, the first thing our instructor said was, all you guys who just came here from Great Lakes Fire Control School, forget everything they told you. It's all obsolete. And it was all World War I stuff. So we had wasted 16 weeks out there. So then I went to Fleet Fire Control School, and I made a high enough grade to get my rating. I graduated with fire control in 3rd class. And then the USS Hazelwood had just been commissioned up in the state of Washington, I can't remember where. Anyway, they were on their shakedown cruise, and they were supposed to pick me up, but apparently things got mixed up, and I waited there for a while, and then they sent me up to San Francisco and to wait for it. And there was a Navy base on an island right in the middle of the bay there called Treasure Island. It's on the bridge that goes from San Francisco to Oakland. And I had a job there. I got there on that first day. I lined up for inspection, and 8 o'clock. And for some reason, one of the guys who were working there, sailors, he came to me and he asked, I guess he liked me, he said, when I ask for volunteers, step forward. Well, I had been taught that you should never volunteer for anything. And so, but anyway, I volunteered, and sure enough, I got one of the best jobs I ever had. We just rode on a truck. We went to the railroad stations and the bus stations and the airport. We picked up, the guys were sitting there just playing poker perhaps. And when we left, they said, don't go in the jungle. So So I was sitting around with a couple of other my friends, and we were getting bored. And we knew there was a native village in the jungle. And we said, let's go in the jungle and see if we can find a native village. So we went in the jungle. And sure, we were lucky enough to find this native village. And there was maybe about 4 or 5 one of these grass huts like you see in National Geographic. And not a soul to be seen. And we just looked around. And then this native lady come around the corner of one of the huts, and she had a bundle balanced on her head. And she saw us. All she was wearing was a grass skirt. But when she saw us, she let out a yell, a scream. And about 1,000 guys came out of these huts with knives and spears. And we took off. And we made it back to the beach okay, but I'll never forget that. Don't go in the jungle. Anyway, we went on and on to all these different places, Peleliu. We were lucky. We managed to get through all these without getting hit. And I can remember, I can see all these landing crafts going up to the beach, and all these, frankly, these dead bodies coming out, floating out. It wasn't very a cheerful sight. See all these Marines and soldiers going in there. But that's the way it was. And then Peleliu, in fact, the island of Peleliu, in the Pelelius, we had the army general or whoever who was in command of the troops who were going ashore there. So the landing craft would muster around our ship, and then he'd give the signal and they'd go in on the beach. And you could see the Japs were hiding in all these caves and whatnot, and we had tried to hit them with our 5-inch guns, and many other ships had tried to bombard the heck out of them before they attempted to land, but they just couldn't kill them all or anywhere near all of them because they were so protected in there. But anyway, I can remember seeing these landing craft going in there and all the dead bodies floating out from Marines and soldiers, and they'd be floating all around our ship. And on our ship, in fact, one time the Hazelwood was drifting in towards the shore, and then all of a sudden we got straddled by mortar shells, and the skipper backed us out of there in a hurry after that. But, and then, well, there was the Battle of Lady Gulf. That was very interesting. We were escorting some of the miniature, the baby flat tops, and we were very lucky. There were 3 groups of them. They were supporting the landing groups, and there were 3 groups of these baby flat tops: Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3, and we were Taffy 3. Well, the Navy, the Japanese Navy, that's when they came in. They suckered Halsey out up to the north. Chase, he wanted a battle with the Japanese fleet so bad that they sent some. Well, actually, the Japanese didn't have very many planes left to put on their flat tops, and they had actually sent some empty flat tops down from the north and Halsey found out about it, and he went off chasing them. And instead of the main fleet where the battle wagons were, the Japanese battle wagons, and that's why there was big foul up there at the Battle of Lady Gulf. Anyway, we were Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3. The Japanese battle wagons were coming in from the other direction, south, and they, among other things, I believe the 7th Fleet, I think, was involved also. But anyway, they did quite a job on Taffy 1. They sunk one of the carriers, or maybe two, and some of the cans escorting them. And then they got to Taffy 2 and were beginning to do a job on them, and we figured we were the next in line. But by then somebody else, I think it was the 7th Fleet, come in from the south, and and also the Japanese, for some reason, they turned around and left. They were, I guess their intelligence had warned them that something was going to happen, I guess. But anyway, if they'd have kept going, we wouldn't have been there anymore. They'd have wiped us out. So, then of course we went through typhoons. I've just been reading about the typhoons to refresh my memory, and I guess we went through 2 of them, and well, we always thought that the waves were at least 100 feet high. Well, in this book it says 70 feet, but that's high enough. And when you think of it, 70 feet, that's about a 7-story building. And our destroyers were about 370 feet long, and that's longer than a football field. And when you get down between those 70-foot waves, you've got green water on the forecastle and green water on the fantail. And then when you get to the top of them, the bow is sticking out and the stern is sticking out, and your propellers are just fanning air. Mm-hmm. And the best way to handle it is to go along with the storm coming from your rear, or one of the quarters. So if the storm is going that way, you go that way or that way, and you'll gradually get out of its path. Because you can't head into it, no way. And but if you get too far that way, you'll start rolling over, and it's very difficult for the skipper or the helmsman to steer the ship under those conditions. And if you can just get sucked into the wrong position. There was and of course, when you try to do anything on the ship, it's almost impossible. The cooks don't make any meals. You're lucky if they can give you a spam sandwich. So all that time, there's no food practically. And my sleeping quarters were way back in the fantail in the after compartment, and my watch station was way up at the main battery director. That wasn't my battle station, but that was my watch station. And so if I was sleeping back in the fantail, in that compartment there, I'd climb the ladder to the hatch, and I'd time it. I could feel it, you rolling back and forth, and open the hatch quick, and log it down, and climb the ladder, and get up one deck above the main deck, and then you'd go on your hands and knees as far all the way up forward, and then climb up to the main battery director to get to your watch station. But there were, and then of course when it got worse than that, I remember I found a ammunition locker room where the ammunition was, the 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter ammunition was tied down so that it wouldn't move, and I would wedge my body in between those cases of ammunition so it wouldn't roll and I could sleep. But there were, well, we rolled over 54 degrees, I believe, was the most we ever rolled over. Now that's over halfway over. And it would be easier to walk on the bulkhead than would be on the deck, when you could walk on the deck. And there were other ships. I know there was one tin can that rolled over 72 degrees and managed to get up.
Wow.
That was miraculous. And there were 3 tin cans that actually capsized, and you don't pick up very many survivors in those conditions. And I'll remember seeing Halsey's flagship, Admiral Halsey, and he'd be steaming along just as cool and calm as could be, practically no rolling or anything. And we used to kids saying, shooting pool over there. On his ship in the officers' quarters. Anyway, let me well, all the time I was out there, I got off the ship twice on land. That once was at Tulagi, and the other time was Ulithi Atoll, where we went after we got hit by the kamikaze. The Ulithi Atoll, why, I'll tell you another thing about the Russell Islands. Now the Russell Islands, I believe, were sort of northwest of Guadalcanal, in that direction. And there's a group of islands, and there was another time we were waiting for the next operation, and so we went in there for R&R, and you get in between all these islands, and you'd almost think you're on a lake in New Hampshire. It's beautiful, and we were the only ship in there, and we were in such a remote place that we put the anchor down, and we went swimming off the fantail during the day, and we even had a movie on the fantail that night. We were such a secluded place. We didn't have to worry about kamikazes or any enemies or anything. And that was one of the highlights of the trip out there. But then we went up to what was I going to say? Anyway, I got off the ship twice. The other place, the Tulagi one, the other place was Ulithi Atoll. That's where we went after we got hit by the kamikaze. That's a huge dead volcanic crater out in it's east of the Philippines, and it is so big. Back then they could get all the Navy ships. I believe it seemed like they could get all the U.S. Navy ships in this one location. Like the capital ships went on to one end, and the tin cans went over to another end, and they were over the horizon. You wouldn't even know they were there. And of course they had to keep watch on the entrances to this place because of these suicide one-man submarines that the Japs had too at that time. So after we got hit by the kamikaze, we went up there for repairs, and I'll tell you about when we got hit by the kamikaze. We had they were invading Okinawa, and most of the ship was down there by the island where the invasion was going on, and the Japs were beginning to send their kamikazes down, and so what they did was that they would send a couple of 2 or 3 tin cans up to the north, maybe about 100 miles north, and they'd be on picket duty, and our job was to pick up the Japs on their radar and radio back to the fleet and warn them that these planes are coming down. So then the Japs figured that the best thing they could do was to first knock off the picket ships, and then they could come down and get the fleet. So actually that was practically a suicide mission. So anyway, we were up there, and I believe it was the Haggard, USS Haggard, had got hit by a kamikaze. We were on our way over to help them when we got hit by the kamikaze. And I'll tell you about that. There was a low cloud cover at that time, I believe, and we picked up the 3 planes, and we knocked down the first one, and then the second one was coming in from the starboard side, and at that time my battle station had been changed from the plotting room, which was in the whole bridge structure. If I had still been there, I'd have been killed. But my battle station had been changed to the gun 45 millimeter gun director, which was between gun 3 and 4, 5 inches. And then the second one came in from the starboard side, and we apparently he got hit, and he was a little bit out of control. I don't know who hit him, but he came in, he was coming right at me where I was sitting. I could see him, and I was looking him right in the eye, you might say. And I just cast in my chips, and he went right over my head and crashed into the ocean just on the other side and exploded. He came so close to me that he left some red paint on the gunman next to me. And that's where my friend Ray Heinrich was a gun captain. But he left red paint on there. He was so close to me. Then we were sort of catching our breath, and the third one came in from the stern, and the skipper, when we found out about that, he was trying to swing the ship around so he could bring the main batteries to bear on it. But he came right down on a port side, and from where I was sitting, he came so close to me. If I'd have had a rock, I could have hit him. I bet he wasn't the dining room wall there. That's that close to me. And he hit right at the base of the bridge and exploded and killed everybody in that whole bridge structure. There wasn't a line officer left aboard the ship. They first guessed that there was 60-something killed, but I think the total went, I would say in the 90s, because everybody there, the sonar, radar, radio, plotting room, fire control, plotting room, and the whole bridge, navigation, everything was wiped out. The skipper was gone, the exec, his relief had come aboard just a couple of days before, the skipper's relief. They were not a survivor. The only line officer, who was the gunner officer whose battle station was in the main battery director, which was just forward of the bridge. And his name was Larry Legas, and he didn't get killed, but a couple of my friend fire controlmen who also were in that main battery director, they were killed. One of them was injured, and he abandoned ship from the forward part of the ship. And as I was back aft, and of course fires were all over the place, and frankly I was looking for something to do, and we decided, somebody said ordered us to throw some ammunition over the side, so we started throwing as much ammunition over the side as we could get, and then a warrant officer. Now a warrant officer is between an uncommissioned officer like a chief petty officer and an officer, an ensign. If somebody gets to make a chief petty officer and then they get promoted any further, they're a warrant officer. And he was the senior officer, apparently, in the after part of the ship. And he had passed the word to abandon ship. Now, in the meantime, because everybody in the forward fire room had been killed, but there were two officers below, the senior engineering officer and the junior engineering officer. The senior officer's Locke, and the other one was Butler. Well, they were still below decks, and they had survived. But they're not line officers. That's why they're like everybody up on the bridge. It's a difference. But anyway, the warrant officer passed the word to abandon ship, because the ship was in really bad shape and fires were going everywhere. Well, I couldn't see I didn't go over the side because I couldn't see any place to go. And I was still afloat, okay. Then I saw the aircraft carrier, anti-aircraft cruiser coming along, the Flint. And so when that got reasonably close, I went over the side. And they picked me up. And I spent the night in the brig there. It's the only place they had for me to sleep. Well, in the meantime, Chet Locke, engineering officer, they came up topside, and they stopped the abandoned ship. Hold it. And then another ship, the U.S. Melvin, at the Tin Can, they came along and they passed some damage control people aboard, and they were helping put all the fires out. Well, they finally did get them out. And by late that afternoon, of course, this all started about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I believe. And before it got dark, I can remember all this happened so fast. They had the fires out on a Hazelwood, and they had it going about 15 knots. And so they started, the next day, Hazelwood anyway started going north towards Ulithi, and the next day we were going alongside the same way on the Flint, and the next day they passed me by Breach's Buoy to the Melvin. And you know where the Breach's Buoy is? Well, first they got a heaving, they throw a heaving line from one ship to another. They weave some rope around and make a ball out of it, so that it's heavy, and then they tie that to some rope about as big as my finger, and they throw that to another ship, and then they can pull a line over, pull a bigger line over. Well, when they get that over from one ship to another, then they have a little, like a, well, like a, you know, a little kid's swing, a little chair like that. A sailor can sit in that, and there's a rope, and they can pull them from one ship to the other. So they passed me over by Breach's, by that way, from one Breach's Buoy, from the Flint to the Melvin, and then from the Melvin to the Hazelwood. And it's an interesting ride, because when you're going along, when two ships are going along through waves about, no matter how high they are, the bows are like that. And as they go into the wave is about this high, but it gets compacted, and the wave will go up, as you can imagine, in between the ships, and you probably, most likely, will get dunked. And anyway, I went from the Flint to the Melvin, and then the Melvin back to the Hazelwood via Breach's Buoy. And so then I was the only fire controlman left back on a ship. All the others had been killed or had abandoned ship, and they had, the Hazelwood was going about 50 knots, as I said, and then they made a temporary bridge, because the first stack had been knocked over the side, as well as the mast. So they made a temporary bridge at the top in the front of the second stack. That's where the control was. And they have, after, way back in the stern of the ship, that there was another helm, where there was a helmsman who can steer the ship. It's like the guy on the bridge. He controls the rudders. And but they need communication. Well, the fire controlmen had, one of their jobs was to take care of all the sound power telephones on the ship. That's the way everybody communicated with each other on the ship. From one station to another, they had what they call sound power telephones. And so I knew all about them. So I rigged up a phone at the top of the second stack where they were taking control, where the new skipper was, and one of the officers on the Melvin came over and took charge, and you rig a phone from him up down to the after steering in the stern, and so they could more easily tell which way to go, etc. And then we went up to Ulithi Atoll that way, and then up there we tied up alongside a destroyer tender to patch us up so we could go back to the States. And as you can imagine, there was quite a few dead bodies stuck in the ship all over the place, up forward. When you figure the fire room and all the other departments that I told you about. And one of the big jobs was to get those bodies out of there. And I'll never forget, after we'd been there at it must have been about between 2 and 3 weeks, it began to stink like heck. And the skipper on that destroyer tender, he raised heck with his crew, because get those dead bodies out of there, it smells, you know. So they finally did get all the dead bodies out. They buried those and put those in canvas sacks and they usually put a 5-inch shell in it, throw them over the side, have a ceremony, and get us all patched up. So we came back to the States, got back to Pearl Harbor, and we got back to the States. We went up to Mare Island, and to be fixed up. And this was back in '45, of course. This all happened on April 29th, 1945. That's the day when we got hit. And so we got back up to Mare Island by, must have been, yeah, it was sometime in June. I think it was around June 15th or so, something like that. And they had I had first leave, and so people who had first leave they had a travel agent meet us in Pearl Harbor to make all our arrangements to get home. So we were all set as soon as we got back to Pearl Harbor, had our ready to go. So on that first night there back in Pearl Harbor, I happened to be the petty officer of the deck. And I think I was the senior officer aboard, because I think every commissioned officer had left the ship. They wanted to get the heck out of there. So I really think I was the senior officer aboard the ship. And I had to, I'll never forget watching these guys who, I had to watch from the 8 to 12 watch that night. And of course everybody who had liberty that night, they couldn't wait to get out and get into a bar and start drinking. So I'll never forget all these drunken swabbies coming back aboard. They could hardly make it up the gangplank. And, oh, geez. And so then I packed my gear when I got off watch at midnight and got ready to go. And of course I couldn't call home right then because everybody was asleep. So I waited until about, I think it was around, there were 3 hours time difference. And I was engaged to be, I had a girlfriend back home. And I waited till about 2 o'clock, I guess it was. Then I called back my girlfriend's house. And even though her father was a vice president of a company, and but back then, everybody just had one phone in the house, and that was downstairs. And so I remember about 5 o'clock back here. This was they lived in Gaspee Plateau, which is Warwick, Rhode Island. And I remember her father answering the telephone, and and I can hear him shout, "Dude, June, it's done." So then I heard him shout, "Don't run, you idiot, you'll fall down and break your neck." And so then I got to talk to my girlfriend, and I told her then that I would be leaving that morning. I should be home shortly. Well, I flew from, I left about 8 o'clock that morning to the airport. I put my sea bag away, stacked it away someplace, and flew from San Francisco to LA to Dallas, Dallas to Louisville, Kentucky. And I got bounced off the plane there with somebody who had a higher priority. So I hung around, found another flight to Pittsburgh. Then my flight was storming there, so my next flight was canceled. So I flew from there to New York, finally from New York to Greene Airport down in Rhode Island, and my mother and my girlfriend were waiting for me there. Oh. And I'll never forget all that. And somehow my future mother-in-law had put together a big wedding, and I was married about 10, 12 days later. The whole shebang.
Wow.
Wow.
And I had, of course, back then they gave us extra leave in that situation, so I had 40 days, and my wife and I, we went to I'll never forget, we went up took the train from Providence to Boston, and we stayed at the Copley Hotel. Anyway, we had a wonderful time back then. Then I took her back home, back out to the West Coast with me. And the Navy at that time would pay for me to fly, but it would not pay for my wife to fly. We had to go by bus or train. So we took the train from Providence to Chicago and the southern route down to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and all Southern California, and all the way up to San Diego, and then the train up to San Francisco. Finally, I don't know how, I've forgotten how many days it took, but I know that I think it was 3 or 4 days, and I knew back then the train would stop at noontime. They didn't serve dinners or lunches, and they'd stop and let everybody off to get their own lunch. And anyway, then I got back to the base, and back then they had, for married sailors, they had a Quonset hut apartments right on the base. These they were Quonset huts, and there would be 2 apartments, and one at each end. And there was a kitchen, dining area, and living room, you might say living room area, all practically all in one room, and 2 small bedrooms and a bath. And my wife and I shared that with one of my shipmates and his wife for a while. Then they moved out to someplace else. I guess another place was available, but so they were all by themselves and we were all by ourselves. So anyway, we had quite an experience there. We enjoyed San Francisco, and I remember that every now and then I'd go back to where the crew was staying, and had their own quarters, and of course they had their own galley, own cook. The cook was still working, cooking their meals, and fortunately I was very friendly with the cook. So I take a little bag, had it with me, and chat with all my buddies back there for a while. Leave the bag with the cook. And then I picked the bag up when I left, and they all kinds of nice food in there. Back then, food was rationed, and it was difficult to get anything. But of course, it wasn't rationed for the troops, the Navy. So because of my friendship with the cook, we did very well. And we certainly, my wife and I, we enjoyed that San Francisco. There's so much to see out there. We were out there, let me see, that must have been from, let's see, I got married on about the 29th of June. I must have got out there around the 1st of August, perhaps, we'll say. And anyway, from then on we'd go into San Francisco frequently. And of course, back then, even though we didn't have to stand watches, you still had 3 days off and 2 days off, and 1 day you had the duty. So if it was your duty day, you couldn't go off the base. Well, there was one day, I'll never forget, there was a horse show going on in San Francisco. And my wife was a very, very good horse rider. She had won awards, and she wanted to go to see this horse show. Well, it was going to happen on one of my duty days. So even though I didn't have any watches, I wasn't supposed to go. So I went to see the exec, who was the formerly gunnery officer who had got abandoned ship from up forward. He was then the exec on the ship, and I was very friendly with him anyway. I used to spend a lot of watches with him up in the main battery director. And in fact, we used to have him over to our Quonset hut apartment from dinner or lunch every now and then. So I had to go stand. I remember standing in front of him at his desk. Mr. Lagus, I'd like to have a special liberty. Well, okay, for what? Why? Well, my wife loves horses and horse shows, and there's a horse show and she'd like to go see it. I'll never forget what he said. That's the damnedest reason I ever heard, but go ahead. So anyway, we went to see the horse show. And then we went, when finally the ship got back in shape to go on a shakedown, and just before just about the same time, they came around and they were going to discharge everybody. They were beginning to start to discharge people. This was in early October, around the 1st. And I have no idea how I managed it, but I was the only one that had enough points to get in the first group to get discharged. I have no idea how I managed that. But anyway, I'll never forget, I was standing on the dock watching the ship take off with my sea bag, because the same day that they were going, I was going to Camp Shoemaker, where you could get discharged. So I remember, I'll never forget standing on the dock waving goodbye to all my shipmates. And then we went over to Camp Shoemaker to get discharged. Well, before that, of course, when I found out that I was going to get discharged, my wife and I went to San Francisco to make arrangements for her to stay someplace. Well, while I went through that procedure, so we went up to the very top, one of the very, very nice hotel right at one of the top of the hills there in San Francisco, and we booked her in the hotel. We made arrangements for her to get in there. So when I went for San Francisco, to Camp Shoemaker, she got on a bus and went to San Francisco to this hotel. I can't think of the name of it. Anyway, when I was in Shoemaker, I got there and everybody's just hanging around, and one of the officers finally came around and said, look, nobody knows what the heck we're supposed to be doing. Why don't you guys take off? Take liberty. So I went into San Francisco to see my wife. So I went all the way up to the top of the, I don't know if it was the top of the Mark, anyway, Mark Hopkins, I don't know. Anyway, I went up to the hotel where we had made the arrangements for her to stay, and I asked for June Petie. Oh, she's not here. Well, we booked her. Well, we don't take single ladies. This is a nice hotel. Well, do you have any idea where she is? Well, you might try the YWCA. So I went down to the YWCA and asked for her. Oh yeah, she has a cot in the attic. That's where she was sleeping. But she wasn't there. So I had no idea what the hell to do, so I just started walking down this street, and who do I bump into on the corner? But my wife. Talk about fate. Anyway, so then finally we had lunch together or whatever, and I went back to Shoemaker. She went back to the YWCA, and in a very short time I got discharged, and I came back and we went up and we booked at this very nice hotel, and we stayed in San Francisco for another few days and enjoyed the sights and everything, and then we took the train home, and we came home the northern route that time, up and through all the Rocky Mountains. Oh, the scenery was wonderful. I'll never forget I did that. Anyway, that's about it, I think.
Okay. Were there any other questions that you wanted to cover? Kurt was one of the other ones that we interviewed.
So you were talking about
Captain.
your captain?
Pardon?
Yeah, I think you
Oh
said
yeah,
that.
the captain. He was a real good guy. He was not what do you call him? Polish, stick and polish or whatever. The guys a lot of them wore shorts on a ship, and you didn't have to have the dressy uniforms of the day, so to speak. So he was a real good guy, and trying to think of these other things. Well, as I just mentioned, the carriers going into these typhoons, these the waves are so rough that they would bounce. Of course, all the planes were lashed down, but more often than not, they would break loose and they just crash. Yeah, above decks and below decks, and they'd be lost. And sometimes they would start fires. And then, as I say, on the flight deck on one of these carriers we saw, actually, because it was heading into the waves, it folded the front of the flight deck right down. These typhoons are really something else. And well, I'm trying to think of. No, I guess I can't think of anything, unless you got some more questions?
I mean, there are a few questions that are kind of, I don't know, the answer seems a little obvious. Just, which theater would you rather have, did you want to serve in? Did you want to go to Europe or Pacific?
Well, I had no thought about it when I signed up. I had in fact, as I told you, my younger brother was in the Navy in the Atlantic, but I had no thought or any idea where I would be going, and I just went where I went. You know, I just wanted to be in the Navy. I didn't want to be in the Army or the Marines, because I had thought about what I saw, all these poor bodies floating in the ocean, and I didn't want to be, as I say, crawling in the mud with my rifle, and like these you read about these, heard about these soldiers and Marines doing. That wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the Navy.
What did your parents think of?
Pardon?
What did your parents think of you joining the Navy?
I don't think I don't recall that they ever said much. We just went. And then, of course, I had two other younger brothers. And then the day I got home, my third brother down, he got in the Army, and of course the war was over then. But I remember he went out in the West Coast, and he got a job as a chauffeur driving some general around, and he had that for so long that finally when they were going to give him his orders to go overseas, he had too little time left in his enlistment to send him overseas, so he never went overseas. And then my youngest brother, he was 10 years younger than I was, and he is, and he went into the Coast Guard. And he spent a time in the Coast Guard. But I'm sure he has they all have some stories to tell. Well, my brother, who was in the Navy in the Atlantic, he was on a carrier, and they ran those ships, they escorted those supply ships up into the Arctic. What was it, Murmansk or someplace in Russia? There's some port up there. They would take all kinds of supplies up there, and that was his ship's job was, as far as I know. They'd go back and forth way up there into the Arctic. Frankly, I'd much rather be in the South Pacific than the Arctic. Frankly, I enjoyed the warm weather, because well, since my wife passed away, we did a bunch of traveling anyway, and I started taking these guided tour trips, and they're all my favorite ones were down into Mexico. I've been down there 4 times. Anyway, that's not about what we're talking about.
This is another one. Did you have to conjure hate towards the Japanese, or did it just come naturally? I mean, it asks about did you hate the Japanese, or was it just you were doing your job?
Well, I really never thought about hating them. I just figured we're at war with the Japs.
Yeah.
We're going to win, and that's about all I thought about it.
Hate is a really strong word.
I didn't think very highly about these kamikazes.
And the last one, did you ever refuse to obey an order for any reason?
Disobey?
Yeah.
Well, when I was told not to go in the jungle, I went in the jungle. That's about the only time I can remember. It's about the only time I can remember disobeying the order. Another time, where the heck was that? Oh yeah, I remember someplace. We must have been in, I think we were at Ulithi Atoll again. Maybe this was before we got hit. It was before we got hit. We had stopped, went in there for R&R supplies, and we just went in there for a short time. And one night, I believe, of course, everybody on Liberty could go into the beach as usual. And one night, I remember I was petty officer of the deck, and captain's gig came alongside, and it was a drunken captain from another ship, and he insisted that the Hazelwood was his ship, and it wasn't. And I'll never forget, I had an awful time persuading him that he was at the wrong ship. And I was almost to the point where I was going to pull my gun or go get one of our officers to persuade him that he was in the wrong place. I don't know, I've forgotten what ship he was looking for, but I remember I had a heck of a time convincing him that he was in the wrong place. That's about all I... But I had like, it was nice to have the, oh yeah, another thing, that's right, I went, oh, I don't think I told you this. So we would take on supplies and once in a while, because we were at sea almost all the time, and we would take supplies from other supply ships, or sometimes we'd go alongside a bigger ship and we'd get supplies from them too. And but we rarely, most of the time we just get them at sea while we were underway. One time we were anchored someplace getting supplies from a supply ship, I believe, and everybody gets in the working party, and most of the food was stored that, well, a mess hall was, the plotting room was right at the base of the whole bridge structure, and the plotting room was one deck down, and the mess hall was one deck down forward of that. And and they stored the food up there. So you had to, when you're bringing the food aboard, you had to carry down one flight, one ladder, and then down another ladder. Well, when we, fire controlman said we had the plotting room there, so when you were bringing these food aboard, sometimes there were things you'd have a case of something that was especially good, you know, and real tasty. So we'd get to the plotting room, and we'd just, instead of going all the way down, we'd go in there, and there were metal plates on the deck in there. Well, our buddies would be taking them up, and we'd put these special food underneath there so that we'd have that. And that was cheating, of course. And another thing we didn't have any ice cream makers on our ship. So once in a while, when we go past alongside another ship for supplies or just to refuel or something, they would pass a couple of containers of ice cream over to us. That was rare. Oh, we certainly enjoyed that. And also I remember one time we pulled alongside anchored alongside a destroyer tender, and they had, of course, they had ice cream on that tender. Well, you had to wait till you weren't if you were off watch. I remember you could go aboard the destroyer tender, and you had to get in a long line to get what they called a little ticket, or what they called a chit, to get an ice cream cone, or bowl of ice cream. Well, it took you, I don't know how long, a couple of hours to get that. Well, you didn't have any time left, so you had to go back on board your ship. Then the next day you went aboard, got another line to get your ice cream. It took you 2 days to get your ice cream. We never were very fussy. We took what we got, whatever flavor it was. But trying to think. Oh yeah, another thing. Like peacetime now, when you see a Navy ship today, they're very, very strict about their uniforms. You'll see all the sailors along the deck, and they have their hats squared, and uniforms are just so, and the tie is knotted just perfect all the way down here and all that. Well, back then, we used to have bell-bottom trousers. Well, that wasn't the Navy. That was tailor-made. And we had a pharmacist made on board our ship when we were out there, and he made arrangements. He would take our measurements, and he made arrangements back in the States for some place there where to have our custom-made bell-bottom trousers, just like that over there, uniforms made. And that's not a Navy issue. And so a couple of months later, they'd be shipped out. That guy was making money for that, I'm sure. But when I got mine, I remember there was something had broken. There was all kinds of powder all over it. But I had all my bell-bottom trousers tailor-made there for when I got Liberty back in the States.